Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Zuckerberg has clearly made a giant shift, as have a bunch of others, Elon, etc. So we just kind of have to take it and roll with it. If they weren't true to it, they later turn, okay, we'll deal with it at that time. But look, we are winning. We're gaining energy. We're getting big time people now on our side who, maybe they're not 100% for us, but they are certainly against the regime that's in power right now. So I think this is part and parcel sometimes of the right being so used to losing so much that they just cannot take wins as wins. It's like, look, you don't have to trust what Zuckerberg says or why he did what he did. As Ryan kind of said, that the timing is sort of convenient in certain ways that helps him out. But in another way, he's going to have a much harder time working with regulators. I'm sure, obviously the Trump administration is going to be much more friendly to him, but still, he's probably going to be hauled in front of Senate committees, other places too, grilled. His life is just going to be made harder, certainly. But look, this is a win. This is a good thing. The vibe shift is real. You're still seeing effects of things like from COVID that have just taken a long time to matriculate, to be seen. And I think this is just the next kind of stage in the realignment that started taking place when Trump entered the race in 2015. And now it's just kind of in the next phase.
Welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and Florida Man, editor of the American Mind. I am in Florida, and I'm very much enjoying neither being frozen nor burned. The world is not ending in fire or ice out here, which I appreciate. I am joined this week by managing editor Mike Sabo and publisher and president Ryan Williams. And we've got some business to pick up from last time. We said we were going to get to the Zuck pivot, and we never did. We ran out of time. So now we wanted to come back around to that because it seems significant and to a certain extent evergreen, or at least its consequences will last for some time. In fact, we wanted to talk about this change to Meta's content policy as part of a larger potential vibe shift, question mark. That phrase has been so overused in the last few months that it's a little bit dicey to trot it out, but it really does feel as if ever since the election, a whole new era might be dawning in America. So we're going to get into talking today about whether or not that's the case, what we need to do to maintain it, if it is the case, and how long we think it can last. But first, Zuck. There was a video that Mark Zuckerberg, in his new broccoli-haired Jim Bro Zoomer phase, released, announcing that he's going to be making some changes to the way that Facebook moderates content, all of them very much appealing, I think, to us and to listeners to this podcast. It may just be bias on my part, but this felt a little bit more sincere and clear and specific than the usual copy pasta version of a tech CEO's kind of content change. This was about letting more people say more things. Zuck announced 6 different changes, all of which trended in the direction of taking the boot off the neck of people that want to say things out of favor with the laptop class. The first thing is that they're making a shift to community notes in the style familiar to those who use X rather than fact checkers. So Facebook/Meta has been relying on fact checkers to flag potentially false material. And now instead, there's going to be a model similar to what Elon instituted over at X, where you can kind of crowdsource fact checking and have people append notes to things rather than having them deleted or suppressed outright. You'll just get a little ping, I guess, that says, here's some information to the contrary of this claim or what have you. And as the name implies, it's probably going to be community sourced rather than from on high via experts. they're rolling back hate speech moderation, which in the sort of newspeak lingo of the day is a good thing. Hate speech is basically anything that the alphabet crew doesn't like. And it comes along with another change, which is that there will be fewer automated filters in the algorithm. Zuck pointed out, and I thought this was particularly interesting, that there's a trade-off implicit here, which is actual illegal material, dark stuff like child pornography, for instance, may slip through the cracks more. But on the other hand, people will less frequently be caught in kind of unjust content suppression just for saying things that had a word that tricked the algorithm or something like that. And then I guess they've been suppressing political content because it made people depressed. And now they're going to let more like current event stuff show up on your feed. Their content moderation teams will move from California to Texas. This one made me wonder whether there were some financial incentives at play as well as political or mission driven concerns. But this is kind of a show of solidarity with the non coastal classes. And finally, he said specifically he's going to be working with Trump to push back against censorious regimes abroad, all of which is kind of designed to let people speak, which he said was his whole point to begin with, connecting people, allowing people to talk with one another. So this is one big data point among a number of others that I'm going to throw out there for us to discuss, including a piece we all read last week by David Samuels in Tablet called Rapid Onset Political Realignment, which argued at some length that Trump's victory, the second victory, represents the wholesale triumph over an elaborate media messaging machine built in large part by Obama and David Axelrod, his kind of ad man turned political consultant that enabled the Obama classes to rapidly maneuver around messaging using vertically integrated kind of digital systems. The ability of Trump and his supporters to break through the cloud of propaganda that machine created was, according to Samuels, like a major watershed moment, indicator of a new era in American politics. And then just more generally, to me, it seems as if we're living through a kind of normie revival. I just watched this Nate Bargatze special on Netflix. This guy is like the most successful comedian in the world. And unlike a lot of the other stuff that has dominated stand-up and culture more generally, this is normie comedy. This is about like a man being married to a woman and having a family and doing like normal nuclear family stuff. And to say that this guy is getting a warm welcome is a vast understatement. Like this is, Super Bowl level crowds like shouting and cheering for somebody basically just talking about being a regular American dude. Overall, it feels a little bit, at least for the time being, like it's normie morning in America. And all of this struck us as potentially of a piece. So, what do you guys think? Is this a vibe shift? Is Trump the cause or the symptom or both? And most importantly, where do we go from here?
It's hard to make sense. It's hard to make sense of the Zuckerberg statement without, I think, listening to his long interview with Joe Rogan, which I found interesting. So a lot of people, the cynical people in DC are saying, look, Zuckerberg sees where the tide is turning, sees where the winds are blowing, and has decided that he must ingratiate himself with Trump. And so this is part of doing that. I think there's not nothing to that. But if you listen, it's always hard to say how guileless these folks are at the top of the tech world. Zuckerberg seems to me to be one of the more guileless ones, especially in a setting like with Joe Rogan. But you can't just take everyone at their word. But in the course of that interview, he basically traces his evolution on this subject, and Mark Andreessen has given a similar account of how this all went down for him in his mind, which is they didn't really know how to understand American politics in 2016, 17, 18. They were adjusting to the shift or the tectonic shift that Trump brought about. And Zuckerberg says on COVID and on misinformation, although especially on COVID, he basically admits, I trusted the normal experts and the normal machinery of the American government, and we kind of regret a lot of that. He claims they push back a bit on some of the Biden administration's more strenuous and sometimes shouting matches they had with their tech counterparts at Facebook to censor quote unquote misinformation. The best anecdote was that It was like a meme of, I forget who, some celebrity, maybe it was George Clooney or somebody, I forget exactly whom, or Leonardo DiCaprio or something. And it was like a meme of him saying at some point in the future, he's speaking from the future in 2028 or whatever, and saying there's a whole class of people now who, have a valid civil claim for vaccine injuries. And the Biden administration wanted them to take this kind of jokey meme down. I'm not quite doing it justice, as misinformation and life threatening. And Zuckerberg and Facebook said, no, that's ridiculous. We're allowing satire and humor. It's I don't know. It's just revealing, especially the first like 40 minutes of that podcast. I commend to everyone's ears because you get a little bit of a view inside the senior level at Facebook and how Zuckerberg was thinking about politics, information, and official authority and credibility. And Zuck basically says most of that collapsed after 2020 and COVID and the basically 2020 to 2024 and Trump's election. You know, a lot of presuppositions about the reliability of government officials were shattered for Zuckerberg, and so this is his adjustment. He says it's mere happenstance that he announced it after the re-election of Donald Trump, or the second election of Donald Trump. It's probably 60 or 70% true, but he says he's been working on this for a while, and his narrative arc about the history of his political enlightenment tracks decently well. And Andreessen, I don't think, has any reason to lie about his evolved political understanding, and his is sort of similar. He's kind of a standard, maybe libertarian center leftist, and then the onset of Trump and the government's reaction, and official Washington and the intelligence community's reaction reoriented his politics. And he said he basically spent a year, reading lots of stuff about how to understand modern America. And I think that evolution in different ways and through different, not venues, but people are gathering their information in different ways. They're maybe not reading James Burnham's The Machiavellians like Andreessen was, but they've come to a similar judgment. So I think the vibe shift started in 15, 16, of course, and it's taken a while to roll its way through our political system. And the shift was fueled significantly by the weird year of 2020 with COVID, BLM, and then what looked to be, to a lot of people, in some ways, a replay of Russiagate in different ways with Hunter's laptop and all that stuff in 2024 and 2023. So, yeah, I'd say the shift is here, and it will continue to shake our politics up.
I think one thing the right needs to learn just through all this, look, we're growing a coalition. In some sense, I mean, we don't really, the backstories and everything about why Zuckerberg changed, Andreessen, et cetera, they're interesting, but I mean, it's not really, we can't possibly judge like the inner chambers of somebody's soul, right? Like, we kind of have to take it. Zuckerberg has clearly made a giant shift, as have a bunch of others, Elon, etc. So we just kind of have to take it and roll with it. If they weren't true to it, they later turn, okay, we'll deal with it at that time. But look, we are winning. We're gaining energy. We're getting big time people now on our side who, maybe they're not 100% for us, but they are certainly against the regime that's in power right now. So I think this is part and parcel sometimes of the right being so used to losing so much that they just cannot take wins as wins. It's like, look, you don't have to trust what Zuckerberg says or why he did what he did. As Ryan kind of said, that the timing is sort of convenient in certain ways that helps him out. But in another way, he's going to have a much harder time working with regulators. I'm sure, obviously the Trump administration is going to be much more friendly to him, but still, he's probably going to be hauled in front of Senate committees, other places too, grilled. His life is just going to be made harder, certainly. But look, this is a win. This is a good thing. The vibe shift is real. You're still seeing effects of things like from COVID that have just taken a long time to matriculate, to be seen. And I think this is just the next kind of stage in the realignment that started taking place when Trump entered the race in 2015. And now it's just kind of in the next phase, kind of like, Marvel movies and that kind of thing. There's all these phases. And I think we're maybe in phase 2 of, how long this realignment happens. I don't know whether it's 2028, 2032. I have no idea. It's going to take some time, I think, just because of how much, I guess, frozen in amber kind of the way of life, the kind of post-Soviet world that we were handed kind of has been there, even going back maybe even post-World War II, liberal international order, all those things that have been talked about, World War II consensus over and over again. But in any event, it's going to take some time. And Zuckerberg, I think, is a key guy to help us to get to a new understanding. I think in many ways, he is really going back to his roots. I mean, in looking at his politics, it seems like kind of post 2016, he was kind of your average kind of libertarian tech bro, Randian kind of type. And between 2016 and just a little while ago, kind of deferring to the experts, disinformation complex, that kind of thing. But at least in reading a little bit about, I think the Wall Street Journal had a great piece about this too, that it didn't seem like that's really who he was. And he was maybe just kind of letting events kind of control him. And now he's really kind of maybe going back to his roots and expanding those thoughts more and more and more and more. But in any event, this is a good thing. The right is certainly winning, have the momentum, and we just need to take wins and move forward.
Yeah, Trump to the age of Ultron. I like that. I mean, what you guys are saying is really making me think that Samuels is onto something at the end of this piece, which we will link in the show notes, where he says there are really three world historic figures involved in this shift. One of them is obviously Donald Trump. The other one is Benjamin Netanyahu. And then the third is Elon Musk. And it's kind of interesting and maybe ironic that Axelrod, the Obama guy's major development or contribution to the discourse is this phrase permission structures, the idea that you can create a permission structure, because that is really what we're talking about now on the right, like hoist by Obama's own petard to a certain extent, where this is about shame. I think it's about people feeling shame to say what they really basically think, which is America is good, America is founded is good, American life is good, and it's good to be normal. It's good to like do normal, as I think that is it the Dutch who say that? Anyway, like this sense of just relief that I feel that people can now state outright their basic intuitions and opinions about the border, about LGBTQIA plus star stuff without feeling ashamed. Like these are normal things to think. They're not hateful. They're not evil and wrong. There was this cloud of like real kind of moral shame that hung around and stifled conversation. And a big part of the change from Trump 2016 to Trump 2025 seems to me to be this, that in the original, like Trump 1, whatever the pre-Age of Ultron version was, the people that really led that charge were very online, even perhaps like fringe people, not in the sense that they were bad necessarily, but just that these were the guys that were willing to say stuff that was being made shameful by the laptop class, by the left. And the whole mood, the kind of dominant note of it was this like renegade memery. These are people that like tweet anonymously and they're, leading the charge. And there's this whole like silent mass behind them of people that don't say they're going to vote for Trump and then they do. And then you get 2016. Now with Trump 2025, it's much more kind of like just all of those so-called silent masses are no longer so silent. And one thing that means is that the very online, very right contingent of the coalition is no longer the dominant note. They're still very much there, but there's much more of this like Zuckerberg type, the follower, right? The person who has seen what Elon did and then kind of come out in the wake of that. And a lot of the coalitional stresses that you're seeing right now strike me as related to this fact that the people who surged Trump to victory this time don't necessarily hold all of the same like philosophical, like absolutist positions as the people who have been on this train for a very long time. And that is, to me, what we're seeing play out now in these online debates. We're going to get into talking about some of them a little bit down the line. But I actually feel like weirdly the normie class is somewhat in tension with the meme lord class. And that's not a bad thing. It's not going to tank the coalition or anything, but it does, I think, mean that this is meaningfully going to be a different Trump term than the last one.
Yeah, we should give just a little background on this David Samuels piece, just to orient folks, especially those who haven't read it. It's long, but it's really worth reading, I think. And it revealed some things I actually didn't know, although they're out there, but I just hadn't, I haven't really read a bunch of the Obama biographies. But, Axelrod, who Obama was courting for a long time before he finally got to sign him on. The son of a Madison Avenue ad executive and his mother, and sort of a student of the rise of the power of advertisement in the televisual age, as our former colleague James Poulos would put it, and its transition into the digital age is wrapped up in the story of the rise of Barack Obama. So Axelrod was a specialist in the case of Obama, which is most relevant, really giving permission to especially not really black voters or the core black constituency of normal black candidates as they've come and gone since the 60s and 70s up till today, but rather giving a bunch of liberal whites in places like Chicago in his Senate campaign the permission to vote for the kind of technocratic black candidate over the more traditional black candidate. And they did that in that race. It was much less social media, as it wasn't really that big a thing in politics yet. But then they took that whole process and adapted it to the digital age and the rise of Twitter and Facebook. And this is where the character Ben Rhodes comes in. And we've talked about this before, but Ben Rhodes' job in many ways on Samuel says his big revelations were on the Iran deal and later on the Russiagate thing with Trump's 2016 election and then his early presidency. Samuel's observed in action this new phenomenon, which had at its source, he thought, David Axelrod, which was to manipulate public opinion in favor of cabining and directing them to a certain set of presuppositions and assumptions about what they were viewing in the political world. We've referenced over the course of this podcast Scott Adams's nice heuristic for the 2016 election, which is that the two political parties or their bases were watching two different movies, while Axelrod and Rhodes and others became experts at manipulating the Washington political class, laundering expert opinion through their friends at NGOs and think tanks. And it was this whole sort of ecosystem of trying to tell the people what they ought to think or excluding from their view certain inconvenient things that might have an adverse effect on their candidate. So I want to read two paragraphs from the Samuels piece because it's just a nice, succinct encapsulation of what he's talking about and how we're really in the beginning of the end, I think, of social media completely transforming how we do politics and public opinion. During the Trump years, Obama used the tools of the digital age to craft an entirely new type of power center for himself. One that and this is after Samuels has talked about his revelation about the Obama administration selling the Iran deal, which he thought was a kind of very counterintuitive move and should have been unpopular given the trajectory of modern strategy in the Democratic Party. Anyway, Obama used the tools of the digital age to craft an entirely new type of power center for himself, one that revolved around his unique position as the titular, though pointedly never named, head of a Democratic Party that he succeeded in refashioning in his own image, and which, after Hillary's loss, had officially supplanted the centrist Clinton neoliberal machine of the 1990s. The Obama Democratic Party, ODP is what he'll refer to it after this, was a kind of balancing mechanism between the power and money of the Silicon Valley oligarchs and their New York bankers, the interests of bureaucratic and professional elites who shuttled between the banks and tech companies and the work of bureaucratic oversight, the ODP's own sectarian constituencies, which were divided into racial and ethnic categories like POC, MENA, Latinx, or Latinx, whose bizarre bureaucratic nomenclature signaled their inherent existence as top-down containers for the party's new age spoil system, and the world of billionaire-funded NGOs that provided foot soldiers and enforcers for the party's efforts at social transformation. It was the entirety of this apparatus, not just the ability to fashion clever or impactful tweets, that constituted the party's new form of power, but control over digital platforms and what appeared on those platforms was a key element in signaling and exercising that power. The Hunter Biden laptop story, in which party operatives shanghaied 51 former high U.S. government intelligence and security officials to sign a letter that all but declared the laptop to be fake and part of a Russian disinformation plot, when most of those officials had very strong reasons to know or believe that the laptop and its contents were real, showed how the system worked. That letter was then used as the basis for restricting and banning factual reports about the laptop and its contents from digital platforms, with the implication that allowing readers to access those reports might be the basis for a future accusation of a crime. None of this censorship was official, of course. Trump was in the White House, not Obama or Biden. What that demonstrated was that the real power, including the power to control functions of the state, lay elsewhere. I mean, a lot of this stuff has been floating around, and I think a lot of our listeners have arrived at these conclusions. But the Samuels piece is useful because it kind of ties it all together and gives you a bit of a timeline on Obama's role in it, both in office and out of office, and it helps put into perspective the RussiaGate phenomenon, and then later Hunter's laptop, and the, as you suggested, Spencer, and you did too, Mike, the entry of Elon Musk, the buying of Twitter. This sort of scrambled all the permission structures that David Axelrod sought to control during the Obama administration, and that Obama and his team sought to control after his administration during the Trump administration. And so that's the mechanics of the usefulness and kind of, at least for America, tectonic plate shifting phenomenon that was Elon Musk buying Twitter. But now, not just America, Britain is all up in arms because Elon has now resurfaced this grooming gang business in Great Britain, and Western Europe is so freaked out about Elon's influence, and I would, in Axelrodian terms, his ability to change permission structures and shift the Overton window. Germany is up in arms about it too, about how their citizens ought to think about the AfD and their new populist right. And so Western Europe, not subject to our Bill of Rights, is much less constrained, and is contemplating things like banning all sorts of speech online on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, or I should say X and Facebook, and throwing people in jail for expressing opinions that might break the official permission structure architecture that those governments want to convey. So the Samuels piece is very orienting for how to understand our political, digital, public opinion world as populism continues to kind of rage and stomp around in the Western world.
Yeah, the Rotherham thing is so wild. Like, when it came back into the news, I assumed there must have been some major development, like something actually happened. And then as I looked further into it, it was like, no, it was literally just Elon started talking about this. Like, that's the news story here, which is kind of insane if you think about it.
Yeah, because I think Keir Starmer, he was head of the British, like the whole, the police, but there's another department that basically like was head of those investigations. And I think it was like 1,400, I think, instances happened, but there were only like 35 prosecutions or something like that. I mean, some insanely low level. But yeah, I mean, you just have to wonder. I mean, you have, for the US, Jeffrey Epstein and everything going on there, all these networks. I mean, that still has probably barely been uncovered. And it's all, there are piles of dirt now on it, probably 100 miles wide, 100 miles deep now. And then over there, I just can't imagine just what's being hidden, what's happened there. And you see, I mean, even with Starmer, I mean, what's the problem with him? It's his own people, actually. That's who he's actually going after. The manner in which they're bringing things up, how they're doing this. Yeah, certainly. Violence in the streets, not a good thing. But look, populism is all about, it's kind of like a teapot going off. And it's like, look, if you don't do something about this, your country is going to break apart. But British elites are treating this the exact same way as US elites. The thing is, though, here, our elites, especially with 2024, I mean, their power is rapidly diminishing, I think. We are moving to a different age. The man in the TV is no longer, I think, has sway over the American mind like it once did. You have just all kinds of institutions and people and individuals and podcasters and everything that are totally breaking apart the old paradigm. And I just hope that the British people have enough resolve to do that over there too. I don't know, because they are further down the road than we are. And then you look and see who've been elected prime minister over and over again, and none of that gives you any hope. Fortunately, America is in a better position, I think.
Yeah, you watch them over there in Europe and you just think, wow, we dodged such a bullet. I mean, there's not that much between us and them, except for, a presidential election and a few other, like if things had gone a little bit differently, if Trump hadn't turned his head at that rally, and we talked at the time, like we just avoided a really dark timeline. And I don't think we even knew like the extent to which that was possible. Meanwhile, now we are having a very turbulent, but also I think much more hopeful kind of dispute over the future trajectory of the country. And it is bound up in this thing I was talking about of like, are the normies and the populists the same people? At what level are the normies going to kind of win? At what level are the populists going to set the terms of the agenda? So just to put a little meat on the bones, maybe we can talk about this jobs debate. I think you can really think about this as a continuation of the H-1B kerfuffle that blew up on Twitter over the holiday vacation. That, of course, was Vivek Ramaswamy saying we need H-1B skilled immigrant visas because America has a decadent and lazy culture. And I mean, I'm caricaturing a little bit, but basically the idea was, we don't train up enough high skilled tech people. And so we do need to maintain our high skilled immigration. This prompted a bunch of backlash over, well, hold on, though, like this is a betrayal of the sort of pro border populist movement. Now you have a slightly different set of concerns being raised, starting with this Chris Rufo tweet. It actually originates in an exchange between Chris Rufo of the Manhattan Institute, very, very well known initially for his FOIA requests, really for digging up kind of independent reporting on some of the most egregious excesses of the left. But now an activist in all sorts of areas, has gotten a lot of great stuff done. And he was talking about, what's a livable salary? What's a living wage, basically? He says the Panda Express near my house is offering $70,000 a year plus benefits for the assistant manager. You can make $100,000 a year working at Chipotle for a few years and working up to store manager. So his point here is like, look, there's economic opportunity in America. You don't have to feel like a victim. You don't have to wallow in these like grand structural theories about how you're living in bug world and everything's in decline. But Bronze Age pervert, the inventor really of the idea of bug world, and a famous like critic of the state, extreme critic, radical critic of the state of things in America, replies, "This is an absurd thing to post. This environment is the worst in decades and maybe ever in America to build wealth through any normal career. It's the worst work environment and worst prospects for wealth accumulation ever. For a young person, it's next to impossible, in fact, even with the best degrees and elite job." This has touched off a whole series of debates, I would say, not even one discussion, but basically about, first of all, has inflation and just globalization and unfettered immigration and the general like economic decline of the state made $100,000 a year an unworkable salary for building anything like a comfortable, happy life? Should people be aspiring to much more than that? Is the whole idea of like a two-parent household with one income and a comfortable family life, is that all dead or impossible in current year America? Or is it fact, is it unhelpful whining to be fixating on that when what you really should be doing is rolling up your sleeves and going to work, like just do the wage job and work your way up? Many, many different variations on these disputes, of course, but these seem to be the terms of the debate, and they seem to sort of center around like, should the right be aiming for a kind of wholesale reevaluation of our system and thinking structurally in terms of like how in terms of the obstacles to comfortable middle class life in America? Or should we be thinking more in those traditional terms of like independence, bootstraps? Is it possible to do both at once? I particularly, personally, liked this Pascal Emmanuel Gobry tweet, in which he basically says, two things can be true at once. One, society is declining. Every generation since after the boomers has it worse than the preceding generation. And today the deck is stacked specifically against young white men. Two, the way out for any individual young man is not complaining and adopting a victim mindset. It's hustling twice as hard, which is unfair, but life is unfair. What do you guys think of this whole set of discussions? Is there a side to land on, or is this just kind of, are all of these things sort of true at once?
I think at base it is unmanly and unbecoming, despite the rapid changes, maybe economic changes and cost of living and changes affecting young men wanting to build families, to whine about it. I agree with that. It's still America, whatever its faults, is still in a lot better shape than Western Europe or Canada, which are, if you take everything into account, much poorer than we are, with a lot less opportunity. I mean, it's a big country with lots of opportunity. Is it much harder to raise a family and buy a house, especially on one income? Yes, much harder. Is your take-home pay about 47% lower than it was maybe 25 or 30 years ago? Yes, that is also true because of inflation, depending on how you count. But, these are the facts on the ground, and resourceful and intelligent people can find ways around them. Now, that doesn't mean that those ways are not going to be painful especially for one's 20s, and will require a certain perspicacity and willing to move around the country. So there are a lot more barriers to entry into middle class prosperity. And so we shouldn't discount that. So that's I'm just repeating, I guess, what Gobri has said. But what does whining get you anyway? And the whining seems to be in the intellectual discussion about the causes is really just a small portion of the internet. Everyone else has to get on with their lives, try to find a mate, and try to make a decent living and raise a family. And everyone should go about that business. I raised, I think, in our group chat about this. There are sort of interesting responses from different sectors of the right to this. There's the what's Bronze Age pervert solution? Well, if you take his book, it's create a piratical manor bund and I don't know. The specifics are vague, but somehow prepare yourself to wage war on bug life and bourgeois last manism. Okay, that's it's not exactly a roadmap, and it sounds illegal, so I don't counsel that. The sort of rad trad, the traditionalists, Catholic but not only Catholic, have a certain view. It's kind of find a way to make a decent living, move to the semi country, get married young, and get after it. That's fine. That's won't work for everyone, but that's not bad advice, I don't think. I asked Mike in the chat, what's the Protestant version? In a separate exchange with Andrew Beck, he said, especially in the 90s and 2000s, evangelicalism had a solution to this. That is the atomization and lack of support groups being an added problem with this economic uncertainty and difficulty. And that was kind of mission oriented, spread Christianity to the world, have a vibrant community with your evangelical church. And a lot of that still exists, but it's been fragmented and wokeified in evangelicalism, which has been one of the themes of our discussion on that front. What am I leaving out? What's the libertarian solution? I mean, it's kind of a caricature of the bootstraps, right? It's the Kevin Williamson option. If you can't leave your town and craft a new way of making a living, then you really don't deserve to survive. Caricaturing, but only slightly. It's kind of a social Darwinian version of it. And screw all the people who can't figure it out. That seems like a bad way to look at it too. So I think this conversation will continue on the right. And I hope that voices like ours and the pages of the Claremont Review books and a lot of our friends writing all over the place, and then also crafting institutions. It's a little idiosyncratic, but as the Boy Scouts have gotten woke, there have been a couple, both a Catholic and a Protestant alternative, that have grown up to fill that void. Still small. You have the cultural, economic shift going on in the country with folks moving to red states, yours truly included. Although I had a stable job the whole time, so put that asterisk on it. But it's still a big country. You can go wherever you want, and if you're really poor, you might have to finance it with a little debt at first to get to a place where you can do better. Or you can even, this is also happening, try to rebuild from the ground up institutions and communities in states that have been struggling. And that's a tall order, but it's not impossible. So I don't know. I hope we can be a positive contribution to this debate alongside the other interesting sectors of how people are seeking to deal with this depending on their religious persuasion and their local platoon orientation.
I think this is just part of the overall realignment. I mean, there are a lot of things and a lot of layers happening here. There's boomers versus millennials versus zoomers. There's all these different, sides of the right coming in. Yeah, you were right, Spencer, to tie back to the H-1B discussion. And I think this discussion is great. I mean, yeah, there's some acrimony and some guys are probably mad at each other and that kind of thing. But I mean, this is great because it goes to kind of who are we? What are the things we stand for? And what are we going to do going forward? And these foundational discussions were not happening in 2012. I mean, they were not happening in 2008, where it was stay the course, be policemen of the world, just, country club republicanism as far as the eye could see. So this is just another example of we're living in a very exciting age. It's a dynamic age, politically, culturally, socially. And I mean, it's amazing just living through it all and the possibilities. And especially just with this discussion, Aaron Wrenn actually, like right before we started recording, came out with a really good Substack actually about this. And a lot of these points I'm going to get from him. So just overall, he says, look, the problem is one aspect is spiritual boomerism. If you're going to take more of the bootstraps approach, no whining, and there's a lot of truth into that, certainly, like Ryan said, I totally agree. It's something not American to kind of be whining, to kind of acting like you deserve a certain job at a certain wage. But, you do have to have empathy, and you can't just talk down from on high. Somebody who's retired, who has their nest egg, who has worked for 40 years, they're living in, $900,000 home, they have everything all wrapped up. You can't just berate people, you have to show them. So that is absolutely a key. And he brought up another really good point too, like class is king. And I know Rufo wasn't saying that everybody should do this, but that this is an option. Say if you're looking for a job at UPS, looking for a job at Panda Express, whatever, you could mistakenly kind of lock yourself into that kind of lifestyle. And that does cut off a lot of things, a lot of just ways of life if you go that lifestyle. Just like, a more white collar job would too. It just gives you a different friend group, different choice of, say, marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So you do have to think about all these things. It does have the risk of, like, say, permanently putting you outside of the upper middle class and everything, all the benefits and everything that comes along with that. And he really kind of boosts an idea of the American dream where, look, it shouldn't be just kind of coasting and based on kind of what a previous generation did. It should be each generation should be doing better and better and better and better. So there's kind of a dynamism there that's, I would say, been in the American spirit for a really long time. And then too, just looking again at generational differences, Zoomers, some job at a factory that's 9 to 5 that would have been good for somebody 40 years ago, that's not what they want. They're looking for flexibility. They're looking for Uber. They're looking for remote jobs. They're hustling. They're going to do 3 or 4 different jobs. So as much as maybe that makes sense or it doesn't, that's at least what they want. So kind of the old solutions kind of no longer obtain. And this is why these discussions are happening. And I think wrapped up in this discussion too, this is why they're looking at guys like Andrew Tate. Because Tate, I think, has tapped into the Zoomer mindset in a way that some other commentators and other people have not. And look, you can't save them from a guy like Tate by doing the same old, bootstraps, browbeating, etc. You actually have to offer them something. You have to be a mentor. You have to show that you care. So I think that that's kind of the next step. I saw some of those things in response, but I think that that's going to need to be a greater way of getting these people, steering them towards the right path.
That's the one faction I forgot, Mike, is now some of his followers are not this, but the origin is Tate, which I would characterize as Islamo-nihilist manospherism. There you go.
Yeah, that's a great term for him. Definitely.
Yeah, if you want to be lifting weights alone in your apartment on Christmas Eve, then Tate's your man. I mean, there's something so depressing to me about Andrew Tate, whose brand is actually secretly fatherless boy, but also it resonates off clearly for some of the reasons Mike was suggesting. I noticed this about the young guys at my gym as well, that they aren't fired up with excitement about the idea of the 9 to 5 job. Like, just some of its mystique is gone, even if you leave aside the also important generational differences that make it hard to think about what $100,000 a year actually means. I mean, I don't think that Rufo really is guilty of this, but part of this is that everybody's been arguing over, like, it's 6 figures, right? And that at very, very recently was a lot of money, and now it's not as much money anymore. And that's, like, in itself kind of scrambling people's numerical assessment of how this stuff works. Personally, my hot take is very similar to something that Josiah Lippincott tweeted, and that is that this is really about the spiritual horizon of normie everyday life. Like, yes, there are huge economic forces at work here, and yes, it's gotten harder and harder to kind of make ends meet in just a, like, basic, unremarkable, straightforward workaday job. But I don't think it would feel quite as high stakes and quite as demoralizing if it weren't also the case that many of those jobs, or that life itself feels somehow dead end or empty. And that is not actually about like how much money you're making. It's about the many, many decades, in fact, even I would say generations of time that we have spent like scorning and devaluing basic human life, so that the only people that talk about this now are the people who like want to live some sort of dramatic and exciting content creator style life, because we can't think of anything that would give like dignity and drama and excitement to just starting a family, raising kids, and supporting them. Like the way that the just brand energy has been sucked out of that life by people who have no vision or belief except material things. Like this is a spiritual problem, and I suspect that the appeal of BAP was actually that he had this like high drama to what he was describing. And yes, Ryan, like it was very vague. And also, however, for perhaps that same reason, it was quite inspiring to think about like the piratical Manabund on the high seas. And I think like a major factor in the Trump years going forward is going to be related to that Nate Bargatze special in a weird way. Like, is it possible again to get genuinely excited about building a middle class life? And that is a spiritual question, no doubt. Like it depends on believing that normal human life is sacred and beautiful and exciting, which is possible to do. It's just like that. It's a sort of different question than the one that's currently being discussed around the economic issues.
Yeah, I just want to add, Spencer, I meant to bring it up at the beginning. The other amazing thing about Bargatze's popularity is he does not use profanity.
Right.
Just one more normie. That's like not even normies these days. That's like 1950s normie. And
No, you can watch him. He's like Leave It to Beaver, and you can watch him with your kids. And importantly, although that is true about him, that is not his brand. Like he's not like a clean comic
Right.
or a Christian comic. He's just a funny comic that people like, who also has these attributes, which is sorely kind of lacking. Like a lot of times people will get all excited about like, oh, like this Christian media is like really great. And it's like, well, it's great if you grade it on a curve. Like it's like mom said that we have cereal at home, and the cereal at home is this like weird off-brand kind of gunk, and that's not what Bargatze is doing, which is kind of cool. We got to touch on Hegseth real quick. He had his Senate confirmation hearing. This is Pete Hegseth, who has come under all sorts of fire recently as one of Trump's kind of nominees. He's Trump's pick for defense secretary, and there's been kind of like a Me Too treatment applied to him, as well as many attacks on him based on stuff he said in his job as a presenter on Fox, specifically about women serving in combat. So Hegseth has spoken out against the current state of affairs when it comes to women in combat roles, mothers, especially in combat roles. And I will say off the bat that one thing that was actually kind of clarifying for me about these hearings is like a person who talks on Fox is not the same as a person who serves as defense secretary. And there's been an unhelpful and bad faith conflation of those two things. Like he said this thing on Fox one time, and therefore this is how he would run the Department of Defense. That's clearly not true. And he had a great exchange with Tom Cotton, in which Cotton gave him an opportunity to sort of clarify what exactly his beliefs have to do with the kinds of policies he would be in charge of managing. What came out of that for me is that mainly in his role, he would be concerned with making sure that the standards for entry to military combat roles were the same across the board. That is, you don't have different standards of fitness and ability for men versus women, that they are high standards and that they are set by the people closest to the relevant combat situations. And Hegseth's point, completely valid, is that those are the only things that should matter in the military. Like the military is not a DEI exercise. It's not a playground for people to like fight their latest civil rights crusade. When it comes to like banning whole classes of people from the military or from combat roles, a lot of that, Hegseth pointed out, is really the president's prerogative and not his. He would be in conversation with Trump about this. So that part of it, the Cotton exchange, was actually quite clarifying for me. Naturally, these things being what they are, that was not the primary dimension of the whole thing, which was instead Hegseth v. the Gal Squad, Macy Hirono, Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren, Tammy Duckworth, all the usual suspects. Absolutely. I mean, there is no way to talk about this without just saying, like, harpying out on this guy, like just a full on hysterical attack. Gillibrand accusing him of saying that Democrats can't serve in the military, to which Hegseth said, I volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden and was denied because I was identified as an extremist over a Christian tattoo. You know, I thought he acquitted himself well here. And I think, like, there have been, Hegseth has been on the rocks in public opinion from time to time, and it's been unclear whether he would make it through. After watching this, it seems pretty likely to me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I forget, is Duckworth a veteran? I think she might be. But
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, and so is Joni Ernst, and that was the big
Mhm.
question. I mean, Joni Ernst is the Republican female combat veteran, in quotes. I don't mean to demean Joni Ernst's service at all, but I think combat veteran is used pretty loosely in our modern times because of all the underlying differences between men and women and the difficulties they introduce into combat roles, just as a matter of strength and endurance. And women may do endurance, athleticism better than men, especially in sort of early middle age, but there's just the brute facts. And Hegseth brought up some of this stuff. Your full rucksack and everything weighs X, and on average men are a standard deviation better at carrying X, or maybe even sometimes a little more than that. And that's just a physiological fact. Anyway, putting all that aside, Joni Ernst seemed convinced, both through discussions she had with Hegseth ahead of time and then his testimony, that she's going to support his candidacy or his nomination. And so that's that. I think Republicans they have 53 votes. They only need a majority, and it seems like they can even give away one or two and still get him through. So I expect he'll be confirmed, which is what John Thune has been saying for a week or two now, which is he thinks all of Trump's nominees will be confirmed. We'll wait for fireworks on RFK Jr. and Tulsi and Kash Patel. But yeah, I thought, it's how to think about this. I was frustrated with Gillibrand because it actually brings up a longtime theme of ours on this question, and then I'll get to the question of his quote unquote fitness or relevant experience to run the Defense Department in a minute. But Gillibrand was like, "What are you talking about? I mean, we have hundreds of women in combat right now. They increase lethality. In Afghanistan, the women could go talk to the women in the tribe and get intel and all the rest. That I have the physical standards right here." She has a piece of paper. They're the same for men and women, and they're difficult. And my post about it on X was, either Gillibrand is naive about how bureaucracy works. She denied that there are quotas, and Hegseth pushed back a little bit and said, if they're not explicit, they're certainly implicit. And anyone who has any friends but either enlisted or in the officer corps in the military over the last 10 years knows what this has done or how this thing works. It's just like affirmative action in higher education. It's sold as just picking up the most talented folks who wouldn't otherwise have a chance and elevating them. No, that's not quota based. It's still kind of a meritocracy in this weird alchemy and how they talk about it. But I mean, a large bureaucracy that is tasked with diversifying its workforce, that is the military, especially on lines of gender, will of course institute quotas. In fact, there's the sort of de facto, you have to include more women in combat roles, which has been the de facto push now for over a decade, will inevitably lead to an organizational turning that will do everything it can to realize that mandate. And given just on average the physiological average differences between men and women, of course it's going to mean lowered standards, if only sort of de facto lowered physical standards, so that you get more women. And the whole organization predicates promotion and success in the officer corps on getting this done. So corners will be cut. They have been cut. As I said, those of us with friends in the military have heard all sorts of anecdotal examples. The imperative of the military is now to get more women in combat, and it has been for some time. And when they run up against the problem of nature and differences in size and strength and all the rest for a very physically demanding job, especially in infantry and all the rest. I mean, Jobrand is either naive and sort of stupid about this, or she sort of blends that with this pie in the sky belief in everything on paper and the power of narrative overcoming physical realities. One last note: I mean, Hegseth was challenged on by not just women, but I think Duckworth took this up, and some of the male members on the Democratic side as well, which is no board of directors would hire you as CEO of an organization with millions of people in it when the most people you've ever managed is like 100. That's crazy. You are unqualified. And my view of this is it's really the technocrats' view of the Defense Department. They brought up expertise, and you're supposed to be neutral, and it's kind of another version of the death of politics. Whereas I think Trump and Hegseth look at it as no, the problem at DoD is not managerial, although that may be part of it. The problem is cultural and sort of directional. And to fix that, I mean, you can hire an underling who knows how to manage well. That's not what the Secretary of Defense is there to do. I mean, we don't need another Robert McNamara. Look, he had a lot of management experience. Look how well Vietnam went. So it's this priding of this belief in expertise or management expertise over moral courage and prudence. And so I think the Hegseth pick, as unconventional as it is a throwback to more of how we used to run government in this country before the turn of the 20th century, let alone after World War II. And it's good.
No, I think this is, I don't know, black pill may be the right word to use, but I mean, it just shows like the state of our representatives still, the state of senators. Tim Kaine's line of questioning about Hegseth's indiscretions, and he's admitted that in the past. And it's like, wait a minute, you ran with Hillary Clinton, who's married to Bill Clinton. Like, come on. Like, I mean, it's like, get the 2x4 out of your eye. Toronto, some of her questioning. I mean, it's amazing. It's like these people are the best we can do. That's kind of my takeaway from a lot of these hearings. Supreme Court justice nominees, that kind of thing comes up. It's astounding to me, just the quality of senators that we do have, especially on that side of the aisle. But not only on that side of the aisle, but I would say with Hegseth, like Ryan said, I mean, it seems like a lock at this point. I don't really foresee any really major issues, with any of these nominees. I've heard from, some members of kind of the older kind of style of movement conservatism, are very scared about RFK and that kind of thing. It's like, look, the guy's not going to be your pastor. He's already said he's going to put pro-life people in place. He's talked to Trump. Trump would not have picked him if he wasn't going to do those things and has promised to do those things. And I would say that's with Gabbard, all these nominees who, maybe even Democrats, maybe liberals, whatever. But I think with this new paradigm and this realignment, they really do believe in kind of what's going on. And I would say with Hegseth, Ryan's right. Like it's a rejection of this progressive kind of mantra, this kind of sit at the top of the controls and press all these buttons. And it's really a return to, politics as the people should have a say. They have their consent. That's the ground and the basis for government, and that they should be able to know what's going on in these departments. These departments should be accountable. I mean, it's amazing to me that the burden of proof is on Hegseth when the Department of Defense has failed audit after audit after audit. You have no idea, where half of this money is going. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars, but yet it's on Hegseth to prove that he's qualified to run this place that's absolutely falling apart. I mean, so it's just it's astounding to me that the burden of proof is on him. That's the whole problem to begin with. It's like, no, the burden of proof is on you guys who have just overseen and chosen people who have just led it into just disgrace and disaster. But in any event, like with Ernst coming on board, I mean, this is obviously going to happen. Rubio, everybody else, I would assume is going to be also chosen too and is going to be confirmed. So I just don't think there are any problems there. But I think, Trump, I think, is realizing some of the mistakes of his first administration. And I think nominees, especially early on, was a big one. And I think he's clearly putting some different people in place who are going to implement, an America First agenda. And these are good signs. It shows that he's learned and that he's serious.
Yeah, no, I'm basically on board with all of that. The only other thing I'll say is I'm absolutely shocked that anybody is talking about anybody's feelings in this conversation. Like, okay, look, I never served until I am drafted for World War III. I have no plans to serve. So it's not like I have some big dog in this fight or some big moral license to speak on the subject. But it just seems like you're talking about what? You're talking about women in the military. You're talking about auditing for financial effectiveness. And suddenly everybody's like, you are devaluing these strong, brave women who have served for you. It's like, sure, I'm sure those people exist. What is the configuration of these factors that is going to make us able to kill the most people when we need to kill the most people? Like, I don't understand why anything else is at stake here. And it's not like going and dying on the front lines is such a desirable thing that we have to fight for justice and equality. Like, as far as I can tell, there are good arguments that even very capable women in mixed sex units are a distraction and make things more difficult. Like, if that is true, and if people who know more about it than I do are like able to determine that, cut them. Like, I don't even understand why there's any degree of sentimentality around this discussion. That's my only other.
Jill Abraham literally said one of her indictments of Hegseth in his comments in his book or on the recent one of those podcasts was that his comments were mean. I mean, come on.
Who can?
Don't we want a mean Department of Defense secretary?
I would have thought that was like the prime or perhaps even the sole qualification for the job. Like, this just seems like such a no-brainer to me, and I'm mystified as to why anybody is acting as if this is a serious set of concerns to talk about. Well, I guess we'll circle back around and see whether he does in fact get confirmed, and I am sure we will be back here to pick apart the RFK Jr. clips. Personally, I'm looking forward to it. But for now, that's all the time we have. So thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we do at the Claremont Institute, you can visit our websites at AmericanMind.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. We love to receive your donations. It's how we keep afloat around here, and we're very, very glad and grateful that you help us do that. So you can go to claremont.org/donate if you'd like to contribute. Finally, we are still taking questions. We didn't do any this time around, but we would love to hear any questions you may have, and you can send them in to info@claremont.org, and we will field them on future episodes. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Jake, and Ryan Gannon, and thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.